Hi everyone, it's Emily, and I love video game collecting, from the physical games themselves to gaming memorabilia that I picked up along the way. I've amassed quite a large collection, as you can see behind me, and through that I've made countless mistakes that have cost me time, money, and some regret. So today I want to go over 10 lessons that I've learned the hard way in these last 15-ish years that I've been actively collecting video games. Now, I'll be touching upon some obvious lessons that we may all unconsciously know, but sometimes overlook, especially when we get a little bit deeper into the hobby, and also some surprising ones that honestly, I only kind of thought of once I was started making this list. So I hope for anyone who is an active video game collector or those who are trying to maybe start their collection, some of these lessons that I've had to learn the hard way will help some of you in your pursuits of building your dream collection. So I'm going to start off this list with a bang, with the first lesson being to skip the limited print and collector editions of games, especially those you've never played before. Now, I think a lot of us have fallen into this, dare I say, FOMO trap, where we see this bright new shiny game that looks really cool, and we have no experience playing it or anything, but we feel pressured to buy it right away because either there's a limited number quantity that's available in the market, so we want to snatch it up as soon as possible, or there's this very limited pre-order time window where to ensure a copy is secured, we have to order it in that limited window. Otherwise, you may potentially miss out. I fall into this trap many a times with many games, and my biggest culprit is probably the limited print model, where companies like Limited Run Games and some other ones, they take a lot of really cool indie titles, and even if I don't have time to play it right away or I've never heard of it before, there's this possibility that this may be my new favorite game, and if I don't get a physical copy of it, there's this little inkling in the back of our minds thinking, I might be missing out, and I might regret not pre-ordering it when I could have. Same thing for collector's editions. For example, I think many people were feeling some regret or FOMO after the Octopath Traveler, the first one, had the limited edition available on the Switch, and how it had that really cool kind of pop-up storybook. And people were like, oh, I wish I pre-ordered that. That looks so cool. And the game ended up being really a big hit, especially in the JRPG community. And I think a lot of people started swearing, like, if the game looked really cool, even though I have no experience with the game, I want to pre-order that collector's edition. Otherwise, I might regret not getting it. But I think having this mindset where we make these impulsive purchases, they start to add up. I know that was definitely the case for my impulsive purchases. Whether they're the limited print models or those collector's editions, they tend to stack up both literally with the number of games and also, size-wise. Our shelves can only fit so much. And more often than not, a lot of those games may have had, better alternatives to play them, or we may not have even had time to, get to play them yet. And even though it's definitely cool to have a very unique piece in your collection, whether it's a collector's edition or a limited print variant of a game, for me, I've definitely regretted buying those more often than not. There are exceptions, of course, but I think kind of looking back, if I decided to skip out on a lot of those, pre-order windows or, when they're selling a very limited quantity at a time, waited to actually play the game, and if I ended up loving it, then maybe buying an overpriced version of that game, I really think I would have saved money, at the end of the day. If you think about it in that respect. Like, it's the same thing that happens with, bulk buying. People will often, even though it's a better deal to buy in bulk, they really only need a smaller portion of what the in bulk, offering is. And if they were only to buy the smaller portion, they would have saved money at the end of the day. So yeah, I think this is a very important lesson for all collectors, and one that I'm still trying to incorporate more myself. And this leads me to my second lesson, that cheap games are not always worth it. I don't know about you guys, but I love a good deal. And I think video games, especially physical games, you sometimes could find bargain basement prices that are very enticing. And I think this is often a very rookie mistake, that you kind of buy a game just because it's cheap. And there's a small possibility that, hey, maybe it's actually pretty good, despite being heavily clearanced. Now, niche games kind of fit into this as well, because there's a lot of really cool niche games out there, especially if you are a JRPG collector like myself. I do like me a good niche JRPG. And oftentimes, because it doesn't appeal to the broader public, they often get heavily reduced on, the Woot app or Best Buy clearance area or, some other larger distribution kind of, site. And you could sometimes snag really good deals on those titles. And it's very tempting to, buy them and think, maybe I'll end up liking this, because it looks unique and it can't be that bad, right? There are plenty of games that I've bought over the years that I definitely didn't need to. And I've either had to, spend the time to sell them, trade them, give them away, or also worry that they may end up in the landfill somewhere because no one else wants them. Oftentimes, those types of games that are really cheap, sometimes they just don't play very well. They're buggy, mess. The textures, resolution just looks awful on a certain platform compared to another one. You name it. Plenty of issues. Same thing could be said for, memorabilia. If you buy a cheap figure, like a $5 figure, you get it in the mail and it doesn't look like the preview photo or the prototype they have, nicely displayed on the website you bought it from. Instant regret. That is going to be taking up so much shelf space, or you decide not to display it at all because you just don't like the look of it. So do yourself a favor. Don't buy things just because they're cheap. And, sometimes you do find really good deals out there. Things are undervalued or underpriced for what, value they bring to you. Definitely just be more discerning when you pick out things to add to your collection. It's kind of the main point of this lesson. Which leads us to lesson number 3. Patience will often be rewarded. Now, this goes back to I like a good deal. And this is related to that there will always be a sale. A lot of these publishers often have sales multiple times throughout the year. We see this with Sega Atlas, Square Enix, Bandai Namco. It's kind of like clockwork how a lot of these publishers time their sales. And you sometimes see these physical games get heavily discounted even a month after their initial release. And if you're not planning to play a game day one, right when you buy it, sometimes it's worth just waiting it out and picking it up when you're ready. I can't tell you the number of times I bought a game only to see it heavily reduced when I got around to playing it. I do know there are plenty of collectors who like to buy things right when they release, just for peace of mind. So they don't have to go search it or worry about it being out of print or things like that. But more often than not, if you kind of follow different, publishers and their patterns when it comes to their physical distribution and also their reprint models, you kind of know which games are not going to be super rare and expensive later on. Now, this leads me to lesson number 4, that we can't always predict the market. Now, as I mentioned, I do like a good bargain, and I don't like overpaying for things. But, we still can't always predict which games go out of stock or out of print at a given time. But I think, especially when it comes to modern games, more often than not, when we see games, go off store shelves or, have limited stock on certain websites or things like that, not only are opportunists and resellers paying attention, but also the publishers. I've seen so many games that, maybe after a while, are out of print, but once there's demand for these titles, often because they're out of print and people are asking outrageous prices for them, you see plenty of these, publishers looking for options or opportunities to reprint them and, get a little bit of that bag. Because why let some sort of opportunist or reseller, make a big profit when they could just sell a new copy of the game? And I think we've been seeing this more and more happen lately because there is still a thriving collecting community out there for modern systems. And I think it will be like this for a while because the Switch, the PS5, even Xbox, people still collect these games physically. And when there's an opportunity to make money, I don't think these publishers will ignore that. When it comes to this lesson, I know a lot of us like to speculate about what are some of the rare, inexpensive games that are going to come out, and try to snatch those up before they shoot up in price. But I think a lot of this backfires because while there are games that maybe currently are out of stock and out of print, we may see some sort of reissue become available at MSRP again. Or we may even see some sort of improved version, like maybe a Game of the Year version or some sort of, if you look at, vintage or retro titles, some sort of HD remaster collection. And I think a lot of this market is driven by demand. And if there's demand, these publishers and developers, they want to give that opportunity for physical game collectors. Now, while physical media may not be quite as popular as it used to be, there are plenty of people, moving towards digital and whatnot, but I do think there's still plenty of demand for a lot of these, physical discs or carts, and also physical memorabilia for games. It's a huge industry, and, if you missed out on one edition of a game, maybe it'll come to another platform, in a new and improved edition. So I really encourage people not to try to speculate and beat the so-called market, especially if you're a modern game collector. And even if you are a retro game collector or vintage game collector, we're seeing plenty of weirdness, with the market, and it's very volatile. I wouldn't spend too much energy trying to, outsmart it. And there are plenty of titles that I bought thinking that they'll go out of print, or I need to buy these now, otherwise I'm going to miss out, and just to see it get some sort of better edition down the line. So something definitely to keep in mind if you are a collector as well. Now, a lot of these lessons I've talked about so far are related to lesson number 5, that not all physicals are created equal. And this is something that I think speaks to me as a physical collector, because one of the primary reasons that drives me to buy physical games is because I like true ownership of a game where I don't have to rely on any sort of online requirement in order to play it. And that's what kind of physical media means to me. Not all collectors collect for the same reasons, but for me, this was an important lesson that I had to learn. And definitely something that I've documented on this YouTube channel, where I was learning about Switch cart revisions and how patches on the actual cart sometimes come later on if you don't pre-order games and wait for those reissues to come out. Same thing with some third-party games, where I would initially buy a game on one platform only to see a more improved version of that set game come out for another platform. Now, this is where patience really can pay off, as well as research. And there are more than ever lots of resources available to understand, what physical release best suits your collection. Whether it's for a certain platform, especially if you collect across multiple platforms, if you want to get the very best one, you definitely can, use various resources to figure out which, game cart or disc, best suits your needs. One thing I had to really, I think, shift my mindset when it comes to collecting is not just buying, games for a platform and assuming it's okay. Really putting the time in and having some product literacy, I think, goes a long way, and has slowed my collecting, because again, the patient collector in me is kind of waiting to see, what is the best options available. And also just, taking the time to deliberately choose games to put into my collection has, I think, really improved my collecting overall. And so I highly encourage people, especially if you are interested in ownership and not being tied to some sort of internet connection for your collection. So just really help make it so that you have more deliberate choices of what you include in your collection and fewer regrets. So we reached the halfway point of this list, and lesson number 6 is not to buy into the hype. Now, this is definitely related to some of the previous lessons I've mentioned, but I'm going to expand upon it a little bit more here, where all of us are very much influenced by, our environments. And I'm not excluded from this. There are plenty of games that, I sometimes have an interest in, and I see a lot of people very excited about them. Maybe it's their favorite franchise, or, I think my gaming tastes align with theirs, so maybe I would like the game just as much as them. It's kind of the mindset I sometimes have, and I feel very impulsive in buying into some of those games, especially new releases, where I feel like I need to experience them at the same time other people who are very excited about the game to experience them. And I've made some regrets in doing that, because I really don't need to be buying a lot of new releases all the time, especially with, a deep backlog. And I do think, buying to some hype is healthy. Like, I do think buying into different gaming genres or different games that we maybe never have exposed ourselves to, that just makes us more well-rounded gamers, and we have a better idea of what our general gaming tastes are. But there have been one too many times where I bought a game because so many other people were very hyped for it, and was often left disappointed because I had probably the wrong mindset going into that game. And then I just have, this game on my shelf now where I paid maybe full MSRP for. And I have some regrets of not just money and space, but also time, that I could have been playing another game that I was personally excited for after I added it to my collection. So this is just more of an important emotional shift when I think it comes to collecting, to really, hone in on what you find important. The same thing could be said for merchandise. I'm someone who's really excited about figure collecting, and I know some other people have tried to get into figure collecting because they see, others in a certain fandom or something are really into it. And then given how long those figures take to manufacture, and once after they pre-ordered it, it comes in the mail, they're often left disappointed, like, oh, why did I buy this? I'll always, I think, have some skepticism when it comes to new releases, new franchises, before, dipping our toes into it and not going full throttle and buying, say, the collector's edition or, all the merchandise before we play said game. So always, I think, a good lesson to keep in mind that I sometimes have to remind myself of often. Now, with all that said, with lesson number 7, you should let your game collection grow with you and really hone in on curation. Now, this is something that I really try to strive for in expressing on this channel, that a nice curated collection is something that has made me really happy over these last few years of collecting and has just really, I think, shifted my mindset to have a healthier relationship with my collecting habits. Because, it's very easy to sometimes skew one way or the other when it comes to collecting, right? Sometimes we can deprive ourselves too much of collecting where we feel guilt and shame all the time. And there's also sometimes we're overindulgent in our collecting where we really don't appreciate the things we've added to our collection. And so trying to, find somewhere in between where we feel contentment, also have constant curation because, as we grow older, as we experience new games and there's new things available, our collection grows and evolves with us. And it shouldn't always stay stagnant, at least in my opinion. Now, others may feel differently about their collections and, every single game that they've, included in their collection, they don't want to get rid of because, that's some sort of landmark or lesson that they've learned when they've, added to it. And I respect that. For me, I always feel when my collection gets a little bit too overexpanded, or there's too many things that I don't feel as attached to, I do like to go through phases of purging where, you kind of just cut back the collection a little bit and, add some healthy growth opportunities where you can, include new things on the shelves that, you've recently cleared. And I do feel like that's a very healthy cycle, at least for me, when it comes to collecting. And curation, I think, is just a great way to always, be excited about your collection because you're always interacting with it, reevaluating it, adding new things to it, and, being very much involved with it rather than just going through the same motions of buying something and hoisting it on the shelf to be long forgotten. So I do think letting your collection grow with you and evolve with you in all of your phases of life is something to be excited about because, there's always something going on with your collecting. It's not so stagnant. So it's something that I definitely learned and have embraced over these past few years. Now, when it comes to lesson number 8, this is something that many collectors do feel, and sometimes to an extreme. And that is that backlog guilt is real. And I've definitely felt this myself. I've collected many, many games behind me, and there's a huge fraction of them that I've not played yet. But I do want to propose a different way of maybe looking at it, because I don't think that having a backlog means that you should automatically feel guilty. For me, kind of touching on lesson number 7 with curation, I do think having a curated library of possibilities is kind of how I look at my gaming shelf behind me, as well as my Steam library on the digital side of things. As, again, kind of a way to helpfully look at your collection and not feel so much remorse and guilt when you're staring at it, because we shouldn't feel guilty or, these negative emotions when we look upon our collection all the time, right? That's not a healthy mindset to have. But I do feel like a dose of guilt isn't the worst thing to have. You know, that sometimes that helps shift us to, okay, because I've bought so many games recently, but all these have remained unplayed, I'm going to start playing them, right? And, it forces you to kind of explore your collection in different ways. So you can think of it like a pendulum swing, right? If it gets too extreme on one end, you need to do something to make it swing the other way, right? And hopefully at some point reach a nice happy medium. But yeah, for me, again, backlog guilt is definitely real. It's something I think everyone does experience. Definitely something that you can, tackle with what you feel is best. For me, I started doing a lot more live streaming with games, and I think it's been one of the best things I've done this past year. Getting to experience a lot of new games in that light, and finally getting around to some games that I've been wanting to for years. So you may not have to do live streaming to do it, but definitely, playing some of your games, it does help kind of lift that burden off our shoulders and, let us enjoy the collection we formed. Now we're on to lesson number 9. And this is one I'll admit I had to wrap my head around for a bit before I took to it. And that is, you don't have to buy every single game physically. Now, there are multiple ways to interpret this one. We could go back to some of my previous lessons about curation and how, you don't have to FOMO buy all of the limited print games of like the indies, for example, and whatnot. Sometimes experiencing those digitally and, learning whether or not you like them first is a good way to, go about collecting. And definitely something that I've taken to more and more as my collecting has continued. This also applies to a few different aspects when it comes to physical collecting. For example, there were plenty of indie games or, PC-only games that I kind of dismissed because there was no physical option to play them. And this was something that I knew I was kind of missing out on, but I kind of let myself, not look at them because I had an excuse, right? There was no true physical, so why should I spend, money on, a digital game? But I've since kind of come to the conclusion that, you should just play games you want to play. And sometimes there are indie games or digital-only games that are a lot of fun and sometimes can also be experienced better on a computer than, say, a console with the physical version. And I've definitely kind of allowed myself to lax my hardcore physical stance for those reasons and either see these digital games as just some sort of rental, especially if I could get them really cheap, as a way to experience the games. Or also, there is sort of a alternative when it comes to ownership on the digital front, and that is through GOG. It's DRM free when you buy from them, and it's basically like a pseudo-physical, just in digital form. And that really checks the box for me as a physical collector, and one of the main drivers for why I liked physical game collecting is to have a physical game that I don't need to have access to the internet in order to play. And I think playing more on my PC this past year and a half has really helped shift my mindset in this way, where I don't feel inclined that every single game that I really enjoy or love, I have to own a physical copy of. And I think it's definitely something that has helped with my curation because, not every single physical game for, let's say, a favorite game of mine runs that well on the physical disc or the cart compared to, say, the PC or digital counterpart. And, it's something that I've been more open to. Do I still prefer physical games? Certainly. I holding up tangible items, and I have a lot of nostalgia for owning, physical games back in the day. So I don't want that medium to die. Definitely, I do not. But I'm more open to digital than I think I was, say, 5 years ago. And I think this was an important lesson that I had to learn and adapt to. And also allowing me to curate my experiences, not only in my physical game collection, but also on the digital side of things, and not feeling more of a limited or limitation restriction, having more of a deliberate curation as a way to, experience this hobby. So I think this is a lesson that definitely took me by surprise the most in being more open to digital, even though I'm a hardcore physical game collector. So take that for what you will, but I think especially for any newcomers to gaming or physical game collecting, I'll be really surprised if this is not something that you also consider, in your collecting journey. Now we're on to the very last lesson that I've learned the hard way when it comes to collecting, and that is space is the real final boss. Now, maybe this one's kind of obvious, but this is one that I really didn't consider because of how I was curating, my collection. And I think a lot of us start out when it comes to collecting, wanting to collect some of our, nostalgic favorites. There's not that many of them, or just our favorite games, right? We had a very limited restriction, I want to say, when many of us start out collecting. You don't really usually jump into this hobby thinking, oh, we want a full set of all the Nintendo Switch games or something like that. I think it's very gradual of how much expands over time. And, space becomes a premium very quickly. And it's definitely something that I've had to consider when it comes to not just collecting my physical games, but also my figures and other gaming-related collectibles. And has definitely made me, think twice and be more deliberate about what things I introduce and add to my collection over the years, and also things that are best to, depart from the collection in order to save some space and make room for the new. When it comes to space, it's not just, how many things we can cram onto our shelf, but how do we visually want to look at our collection? I take a lot of time, trying to arrange my shelves so that they're a reflection of, what I love about the hobby. Making it, I guess, not only aesthetically pleasing to the eye, but, just an inviting space that really showcases my love for the hobby and showing what, I guess, marks as my favorite franchises and things I like about it. So not only do I like to have, games front and center, but I have a lot of collectibles from some of my favorite franchises, with my favorite being the Trails franchise. And I've gone to many pains trying to, arrange those shelves to my liking over the years. But yeah, definitely, this one's probably not, a surprise. Space is a premium, but it's definitely a reality that a lot of us collectors, soon realize, especially if we have to move. That's when things get hard. But if you have a nice, stable environment where you are collecting, more power to you when you want to fill out that space just the way you want to. And I want to take the time to thank all my channel members who make videos like these, as well as my live streams, possible here on YouTube. And also a huge shout out to all of my Orban architects who go above and beyond: Dr. God, Trin, Night Noctum, George, Joe, and Champagne Sherpa. Thank you so much for all of your support. I love to hear which lesson is most relatable in your current collecting journey. And also if there's any lessons that you guys have had over the years that are not included in this list. I'd love to hear, what other collectors have experienced and what they think are things that they've had to learn the hard way. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and until my next one, bye guys.